Hello, welcome back to the payment request form for non-PO invoices tutorial. Here I'm going to now demonstrate how to use the payment request form which has been built in Excel. In my previous tutorial, I talked about when should you be using the payment request form, and now I will guide you on how to operate the payment request form. So I'm quickly going to jump over to the payment request form. So here is the form in Excel. The latest version, the latest version is version 14, to which we've made certain minor changes along the way. But you can also find this on a link that I will share along with the email that will go out. So the payment request form should be used for non-PO purchases, and there is a PO exception list that I talked about. We would like you to limit non-PO purchases to items on that list, and for all other purchases use the purchase order method. So the purchase request form has two parts, two major parts. The first, the the top part is where you will fill all general information, and the part below is where you will fill information related to the invoice you receive for goods or services. So we start right at the top here with the date of request, which by default should be today's date. Um, so I'm going to go and complete that, and so today is 13th of December. So I'll put that date. Sorry. Alright, so 13 December 2017 is today's date. The next field that you will look at, and before I proceed, I just want to introduce a few parts of this form further. So if you see that each field has been marked with an alphabet, so that's the sequence in which you should go about completing the form. There are a few additional tabs that have information that will be helpful. So there's instructions of use, of when you should be using this form, and also at the bottom of this second tab we have footnotes that relate to the alphabets that I've mentioned on the payment request form. That's form on tab 1, right? So if you see A, it's been referenced here, date when the request for payment is initiated. By default, this is the day form is first completed. Right? So you can refer to these footnotes if you want to understand what those fields mean. We also looked at the process flowchart in the earlier tutorial, but again we've also included that in the form here. There's the PO exception list. We looked at the various categories that we do not require you to follow the PO process, but you can submit a payment request form such as this one. And finally, I also talked about some issues that Mac users could face, and there are some simple workarounds here. So coming back to the payment request form, I'm now proceeding with the entity field. Now the entity fields are the various companies under the Bridge group. Here is a list of all companies that operate under the Bridge group. So there is the LLP and the trust in India. We've got two entities in East Africa, Kenya, Uganda. We've got support offices in UK, US, and of course we've got two operating countries in West Africa, which is Nigeria, and then there is Liberia. So I will take Kenya as an example here. So let's say the invoice that I've received is relating to Kenya. I will select Kenya, and then I'll proceed to the business unit. So for each of these countries, these entities, we have certain fixed number of business units that operate in those countries. So for Kenya, this is the list. So there is regional services for East Africa, which is this is Kenya, Uganda combined. There is Kenya separately, there is Uganda separately, there's the Kenyan schools, and then there are certain services that are performed in Kenya which is offered to the globe, I mean to all other bridge companies. Similarly, if you go and select Uganda here, you will see the business units that operate in Uganda, right? Um, so these you will see, for example, there is Uganda schools, and then there is global services Uganda. Some of the expenses could be common between Uganda and Kenya, right? For India, India, we've got regional services Andhra Pradesh, we've got the partnership schools, and then of course we have the global services based in Hyderabad, right? Under the trust in India, and sorry about that. Should have actually muted my Skype there. Sorry. So let's proceed. So for India, CFET, which is the entity that operates the schools in Andhra Pradesh. So under this, we operate. This expenses could be related to the region or for the AP schools. Now, one thing that you need to be aware of, which I'll of course, without getting into those complex scenarios right now, let me actually go back and select Kenya, um, and then come back to the business unit, delete this, and start all over again. So for Kenya, the expenses that you've incurred for which you now need to pay could be related to any of these business units. So let's say, for example, in this case, I'm going to take Regional Services Kenya as an example, right? So this is Regional Services Kenya is the Nairobi office, uh, the office itself, or people that work in the office. The expenses would be coded to the business unit called Regional Services Kenya. Under the department, we have populated this drop down list with the most widely used department list, and it's pretty exhaustive. It's got almost all the departments that operate in each of our locations, right? So let's say, for example, this expense relates to electricity bill payment, right? So the electricity bill payment um, will be, if you look at this list, it will need to be coded to general corporate. So I'm looking for general corporate here. So this is general corporate. So this is where this expense needs to be coded. So this is the combination to which this expense will be coded. This is the accounting information along with the spend category information that will ensure that the correct accounting entry is passed for this expense. Next field is of course the requester notes. Here you could include any special instructions, information that you would like both the approver and the accounts payable team to be aware of, right? For example, I use this field in case there was an advance payment made to the vendor. I would provide information about that advance payment. All right. Next, I will then use this field to put my name, and I will also include my designation here, right? This of course needs to be approved by someone in who's responsible for this business unit and department. So since I said it's electricity bill, this is a people related cost, so I'm going to put Divya's name here, right? VP people, right? And certain expenses you may be required for additional approval, whether it's based on the value of the expense, or there are certain functions that have global leaders or leaders based out of other offices that should be also be approving these expenses. Then I would put their name in the second approval. For this example, I will skip that, but keep in mind that this needs to be sent by email first to the first approver, and they need to then forward it to the second approver. The final approver will need to forward it to the payables team. All right. So for now, for this example, I'm going to skip that. I'll go to currency. This is usually the currency in which you have received the invoice, uh, which in this case is Kenyan shillings. Right. I'll put the name here, electricity board, right, that you're making this payment to. Now, once you've completed this information in the top, you need to then proceed to the second section where you will include information that is on the invoice. All right. So let's say there is an invoice number 123456. I received this about 2 days ago. It's actually invoiced, sorry, the invoice was generated two days ago. So I'm going to put the 11th as the date. And then I'm going to describe electricity bill for November 2017, right? Now coming to the spend category, this spend category list is not very exhaustive because the list is quite huge, and so we've taken the most widely used spend categories over the last 18 months at Bridge across different companies. So now this particular expense relates to utilities. There you go. So I have an option to select electricity, right? Now, in this case, and let's say the bill amount is 30,000 shillings. Okay, I'm just making this number up. Now, if this is related to the Nairobi office, like I've said, regional services, let's say this electricity bill is related to the Nairobi office, then there is no need to further break it down by academy or department. But there could be cases where you need to split the invoice and bill it to multiple departments, right? In that case, excuse me, you would then go ahead and select various departments here, which will then enable. So this is not a good example because the electricity bill will be coded to the general corporate, but let's say for example you have certain expenses which need to be billed to various departments. Then in that case you will select various departments on top and then come down here, and that list is provided again here. Of course, do not choose various departments here again, but you would then have to choose the specific departments to whom you would want to charge this expense to, right? So I'm just going to go back and make this general corporate, which means in this case it's a pretty straightforward transaction. There is one invoice is being billed to one business unit, to one department. That's it, right? Once you've done that, you've completed the form. There is nothing else to do. You simply click the generate button, which will create a PDF file uh, of this document. Again, the emphasis is on PDF documents. These are non-editable. We don't want anyone to edit these files once you have filled and forwarded for approval is been approved. We do not want anyone to edit this file. So this file will then get generated in PDF, which you have to then forward along with the invoice to the approving authority, which is usually the head of department or department director, who will approve and forward it to the country email address relevant for your country, right? Now let me talk about a few different scenarios in which you probably may need to do a little more work before you can submit this for approval. Let's say, for example, this expense relates to regional services Kenya, but then you need to split this against multiple departments, right? So what you would do is say, and electricity is not a very good example here. Let me take, for example, legal fees. You have the same legal vendor, but various departments have kind of used their services for a variety of purposes. So I'm just giving this as an example. May not be true, and may be possible that it all gets billed to legal only. But if it does, then in that case, you would go ahead and select various departments, and then this 30,000 needs to be billed to two different departments. So let's say it's an equal split between two departments. You will copy paste this information again on line 2, and then go ahead and mention the two legal departments that this needs to be billed to, right? Similarly, if this expense relates to academies, right, in that case you do not need to fill the department. You simply go ahead and change the business unit to one that has schools mentioned in this. So this is an example of Kenya, but in every country except for the UK and the US, we have schools listed. So if you list school, this column here will list all the schools that operate in that country, right? So these are all the schools that are there in Kenya. So they've been listed here. Similarly, if I go and select Liberia and say it's got Liberia schools, make sure that you change both. So you would then see the Liberian schools mentioned here, all the schools that we operate in Liberia, right? So you don't need to fill the department here. Simply go ahead and select schools, and then list the various schools that you want this expense to be coded to. This is not really great, but yeah, we can treat it here, but it could be a power problem in PDF. I'll try and fix that. Once you've done that, you then need to, for Liberia specifically, there is a need that we also need to provide the code, right? So yeah, you can read on top here to select the right code, which is required for Liberia only at the moment, right? Other countries don't need it. So if you have a certain expense that is academy related and you need to split that against across multiple academies, so you would need to make sure that there is schools mentioned. So for Nigeria, you will select Nigeria LA partnership schools, or there are two. There are Lagos schools and Nigeria Lagos partnership schools. So there are different schooling models that we have in Nigeria. So you would select the relevant one and then select from the drop down. For India, it's pretty straightforward. In India, we operate 4 schools. So this will then provide a drop down of those 4 schools, right? So this is how you complete the payment request form. And once you've done that, once you've filled out all the details, you hit generate again and then save the file at a location where you can then open it and send it by email for approval. So please go through this form in detail. We've answered most frequently asked questions. We've provided footnotes. We've explained the process flow, the exception list where you don't need a PO. You can use the payment request form, and also, like I said, some workarounds for Mac users. So I hope this is helpful. If not, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. Thank you.